Imagine standing on a jagged ridge, thousands of feet above sea level. The air is thin, the sun is blistering, and the terrain is unforgiving stone and scrub. You look out into the valley and you see dust. Not just the dust of the wind, but the dust of movement. Thousands of feet, thousands of horses. You are Havildar Ishar Singh. You are a sergeant in the 36th Sikh Regiment of British India. You have 20 men under your command. And marching toward your tiny, mud-walled signaling post are not 500 men, not 1,000, but 10,000 highly skilled, heavily armed Pashtun tribesmen. There is no air support. There is no radio to call for a sudden extraction. There is no possibility of reinforcement arriving in time. The math is simple, and it is terrifying. Each one of your men has to fight 500 of the enemy. Most men would surrender. Most men would flee into the mountains. But you and your men are Khalsa Sikhs. You do not run. You do not bow. You check your ammunition. You fix your bayonets. And you prepare to die. This is not a scene from a movie. This is not a legend from ancient mythology. This happened on September 12, 1897. This is the Battle of Saragarhi, arguably the greatest last stand in the history of modern warfare. To understand why 21 men were left alone on a mountain ridge to face an army, we have to look at the map of the late 19th century. This was the era of the Great Game, the strategic rivalry between the British Empire and the Russian Empire for supremacy in Central Asia. Between these two superpowers lay Afghanistan and the fierce, independent tribal lands of the northwest frontier. For the British, this frontier was the edge of the known world, a lawless buffer zone protecting the jewel in their crown. India. The region was volatile. The local Pashtun tribes, the Orakzais and the Afridis, were fierce warriors. They knew every cave, every ridge, and every goat path. They resented the British encroachment, the building of forts, and the imposition of borders on lands they had roamed freely for centuries. In 1897, the frontier exploded. A massive uprising began, fueled by religious leaders who called for a holy war to drive the British out. The entire border was in flames. The British military presence in the area relied on a series of forts along the Samana Range. The two most important were Fort Lockhart and Fort Gulistan. But there was a problem. These two forts were miles apart, and due to the rugged terrain, they could not see each other. They couldn't communicate. In the days before radio, the British relied on the heliograph, a device that used mirrors to reflect sunlight to flash Morse code messages across great distances. But since Lockhart and Gulistan didn't have a line of sight, they needed a relay station in the middle. That relay station was Saragarhi. It wasn't a fortress. It was a small blockhouse, barely large enough to house a few dozen men and a pony. It had a stone wall, a wooden gate, and a signaling tower. It was never designed to withstand a siege. It was just a communication hub. Manning this hub were the soldiers of the 36th Sikhs. These were not ordinary conscripts. The Sikh martial tradition is legendary. Born in the Punjab, the Sikh faith emphasizes bravery, standing up against tyranny, and protecting the weak. For a Sikh soldier, the concept of death before dishonor was not just a slogan. It was a way of life. The morning of September 12th broke with an eerie stillness. The soldiers at Saragarhi began their daily routine. They cleaned their Lee Metford rifles, state-of-the-art bolt-action weapons for the time. They prayed. They ate. But shortly after 9:00 a.m., the sentries spotted the dust clouds. The Orakzai and Afridi tribes had united. They knew that if they could take Saragarhi, they would sever the communication between the two main forts, isolating them and allowing the tribes to pick them off one by one. Inside the signaling tower, Sepoy Gurmukh Singh, the detachment signaler, adjusted his mirrors. He flashed a message to Fort Lockhart. Enemy approaching the main gate. The reply from Lieutenant Colonel Houghton at Fort Lockhart was grim. He could see the enemy movement. He estimated their numbers at somewhere between 10,000 and 14,000. Houghton wanted to help. He tried to gather a relief column, but the tribesmen had already cut the road. Saragarhi was completely surrounded. Gurmukh Singh received the message that would break most men. Unable to break through. "You are on your own." Havildar Ishar Singh, the commander of the post, gathered his men. He was a man in his mid-40s, a veteran who had seen combat before. He didn't offer them false hope. He didn't promise a miracle. He simply reminded them of who they were. They were Singh's lions. They had sworn an oath to the regiment and to God. The 21 men took their positions. They knew the topography of the fort. They secured the gate. They climbed to the ramparts. They waited. The first wave of the attack was not a subtle maneuver. It was a roar. Drums beat, standards waved, and thousands of tribesmen surged up the rocky slopes, screaming war cries. The noise must have been deafening. But inside the fort, the discipline was absolute. Havildar Ishar Singh ordered his men to hold their fire. The Lee Metford rifle was accurate up to long ranges, but ammunition was finite. Every shot had to count. When the enemy came within range, the command was given. Fire, a volley of lead tore into the advancing wave. The Sikhs were marksmen. They worked the bolts of their rifles with mechanical precision. Fire, eject, load, fire. The first wave of tribesmen faltered and fell back, leaving bodies scattered on the rocks. The enemy was shocked. They expected the tiny garrison to be overrun in minutes. Instead, they had walked into a meat grinder. Realizing that a frontal assault was suicide against such disciplined fire, the tribesmen changed tactics. They moved to the blind spots of the fort. They used the rocky terrain for cover, inching closer, firing their antique muskets and newer stolen rifles at the loopholes. The battle raged for hours. The sun rose higher, baking the stone walls. Inside, the heat was suffocating. The soldiers ran low on water, but they didn't stop. Sepoy Bhagwan Singh was the first to fall, killed by a stray bullet. His body was dragged to the back of the compound. But there was no time to mourn. The enemy began to focus their fire on the wooden gate. It was the weak point. They tried to rush it, but again and again, the Sikhs repelled them. At Fort Lockhart, miles away, British officers watched through their telescopes in horror and awe. They could see the tiny flashes of rifle fire from Saragarhi. They could see the ocean of enemies swarming the walls. They counted the hours. 1 hour. 2 hours. 3. The 21 men were holding back an army. But the tribesmen were cunning. While the main force distracted the Sikhs with heavy fire from the front, 2 Pashtun soldiers managed to creep under the blind angle of the wall. They began to dig. They weren't digging a tunnel. They were digging at the foundation of the wall itself. The mortar was old, the stones loose. Unseen by the defenders, the structural integrity of the fort was being compromised. It was now early afternoon. The battle had been raging for nearly 6 hours. The ammunition was running low. Several Sikhs were dead. Nearly all were wounded. Suddenly, a massive section of the wall collapsed. The tribesmen had succeeded in undermining the defenses. The roar of the falling stone was followed instantly by the roar of the invading army. This was the moment of truth. The distance of rifle fire was gone. This was now hand-to-hand combat. The Sikhs abandoned the perimeter and retreated to the inner courtyard. They fixed their bayonets. Those who had lost their rifles drew their talwars, curved swords. The fighting was visceral. It was brutal. It was intimate. Havildar Ishar Singh, wounded and exhausted, ordered his remaining men to retreat into the inner blockhouse to prolong the defense. But someone had to cover their retreat. Ishar Singh, the commander, the father figure to these men, chose to stay out. He ordered his men inside, and he stood alone at the breach. With his rifle in one hand and his sword in the other, he charged the incoming wave. Accounts from the tribesmen later described a single Sikh soldier fighting like a demon, cutting down men left and right, refusing to fall even as he was riddled with bullets. He bought his men precious minutes. Inside the blockhouse, the remaining defenders locked the door. But the end was inevitable. The tribesmen set fire to the structure. The room filled with smoke. The wood began to burn. There was one man left who was not in the blockhouse. Sepoy Gurmukh Singh. He was still in the signaling tower. Throughout the entire 6-hour battle, amidst the screams and the gunfire, he had remained at his post. He had been flashing a play-by-play account of the battle to Fort Lockhart. He had watched his friends die. He had watched the wall fall. Now, with the fort overrun and the blockhouse burning, he sent his final message. It wasn't a plea for help. It wasn't a cry of despair. He signaled, "Permission to stop signaling and pick up my rifle." The officer at Fort Lockhart, tears likely in his eyes, signaled back. Permission granted. Gurmukh Singh carefully packed away his heliograph equipment. He dismantled the device that was the property of the British Army. He picked up his rifle, fixed his bayonet, and climbed down from the tower into the mass of enemy soldiers. The Pashtuns later recounted that this final Sikh soldier killed 20 men before they finally brought him down. As he fought, it is said he shouted the Sikh battle cry. Jo bol so nihal sat Sri Akal, blessed is he who says God is truth. By 3:30 p.m. the guns fell silent. All 21 men were dead. The silence at Saragarhi didn't last long. The delay caused by those 21 men had been fatal for the tribal uprising. The 7 hours bought by the 36th Sikhs allowed reinforcements to reach Fort Gulistan. The artillery arrived. The surprise attack had failed. When the relief column finally retook Saragarhi 2 days later, they found a scene of devastation. The fort was a ruin, but around the bodies of the 21 Sikhs lay the bodies of over 600 tribesmen. Some reports suggest the enemy casualties were even higher, perhaps over 1,000 wounded or killed. The news of the battle spread like wildfire. It reached London. It reached the Parliament. The entire British Empire was stunned. Queen Victoria herself was said to be moved to tears. In a rare move, every single one of the 21 soldiers was posthumously awarded the Indian Order of Merit Class I. At the time, this was the highest gallantry award available to Indian soldiers, equivalent to the Victoria Cross. It had never happened before, and it has never happened since, that an entire detachment received the highest honor for a single engagement. Today, the Battle of Saragarhi is taught in military schools around the world. It is cited by the United Nations as one of the 8 most significant stories of collective bravery in human history. But beyond the medals and the history books, the story of Saragarhi is a testament to the human spirit. It asks us a question. When the odds are impossible, when there is no hope of survival, and when the easiest path is to run, would we have the courage to stand? Havildar Ishar Singh and his 20 men gave their answer on a dusty ridge in 1897. And their answer echoes through history. They held the line.